Wesley Clark, the former NATO Supreme Allied Commander. General, much of your focus in the 1990s was the war in former Yugoslavia. These upsetting scenes that we see from Mariupol today, the mass graves, they're really quite reminiscent of that horrible period.
Absolutely. The difference, of course, is that the Serbs then were an army, and they were attacking the Muslim civilians who had no army. Today, the Ukrainians are really putting up a fight, but these poor people who are isolated in Mariupol and other urban areas, they're not armed, they're not combatants, they're just there on the receiving end, and it seems pretty clear that Mr. Putin is doing this on purpose to put humanitarian pressure on President Zelensky and hope you'll break his morale and you'll give up and surrender.
When we saw that attack in Mariupol on the maternity and children's hospital yesterday, the World Health Organization says that they verified 24 Russian attacks on healthcare centers in Ukraine since the Russian invasion began. We saw Putin do this in Syria as well, according to aid groups. What does Russia gain by bombing hospitals and medical centers?
It's a terror campaign against the civilian population. It intimidates the medical personnel. It keeps people from going to the hospitals when they're wounded and need assistance. It runs out international aid organizations who might be in those hospitals. It's pure terror. It's absolutely a war crime. And the names of the Russian commanders, as well as, of course, Mr. Putin, who's ultimately in charge, need to be taken on this. And I hope the International Criminal Court will do so.
The Wall Street Journal reported that the leaders of Saudi Arabia and the UAE declined to take phone calls from President Biden, in which he was going to try to get some help, apparently, for oil prices and also support for the NATO position against Putin's invasion and attack of Ukraine. You see what's going on in the world right now as something of an inflection point. We're changing into something else. Explain that.
It is, Jake, this is an inflection point. Even though we didn't choose it, this fight for Ukraine is critical for the future of American foreign policy and what the Biden administration says is a rules-based international order. And many nations are on the sidelines. They've got arrangements with Russia. In some countries in Africa, they're receiving illegal Russian weapons and other things. They're connected to Russia on the energy business or in financial transactions, and they doubt the ability of the United States to stick with it and help Ukraine. If the United States stays with it, Ukraine wins on the ground. The facts on the ground will determine a successful outcome for President Zelensky and the United States. If the United States backs away from this crisis, thinking that, well, it's, they're not a member of NATO, maybe we can just focus on Taiwan, the whole position, the credibility of the United States, the strength of the dollar, our alliances will be much, much weaker. NATO's best defense is provided by President Zelensky in Ukraine, and that's simply a matter of fact.
A fellow former Supreme Allied Commander, Admiral Stavridis, yesterday said that he thought the U.S. should rethink its opposition to getting those Polish fighter jets, MiGs, through Ramstein Air Base to Ukraine. And earlier today, Avril Haines, the Director of National Intelligence, suggested that there is a new intel assessment that informed the decision for the U.S. to not send those jets. How did you interpret that? And do you agree with Stavridis that the U.S. should figure out a way to get these jets to Ukraine?
I do agree with Stavridis. I was happy he said that. Look, there is always going to be an escalating threat from Mr. Putin. He believes he can scare us into not doing anything. And he has the means to do some terrible things to the world. He's got chemical weapons. He's got biological weapons. He has nuclear weapons. He has weapons in space. All these things are of concern to the United States, but they're not going to go away. If we duck the challenge in Ukraine, those same pressures will be against us wherever we turn in foreign affairs. The time to face those pressures is now. This administration has to lean into the problem rather than ducking back from the problem. Got to be proactive rather than reactive. And being proactive means getting those additional fighter jets in. It means improving the arms shipments. It means putting a humanitarian corridor and preventing the isolation of Kyiv. If we let Kyiv be encircled, as clearly the Russians want to do, then we'll be in a much, much worse position. Every move we've tried to make seems to be broadcast to the public. There's people talking about it, and then before you know it, Mr. Putin says, well, that's an act of war. Pretty soon he's going to say, giving food to the Ukrainians is an act of war. What are we going to do with that? So the time to get it is now, to get ahead of this while the Ukrainians are still really in the fight. There is a very real chance that with the right air support and the right support in terms of javelins and stingers, they can defeat the Russian army on the ground. And if that army is defeated, Vladimir Putin goes, and it's a new world.
All right, well, that's two successive former NATO Supreme Allied commanders that have come on the lead and said that the U.S. should rethink this opposition to getting those Polish MiGs to Ukraine. General Clark, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. Vice President